One thing I will say is everything in this episode is for people who don't have a direct connection to Auschwitz. If your family was in the camp, you get to decide for a totally yourself. Take your kids when they're babies, take them every single year if that's what you want to do, because you have that direct connection with it and I don't. So if you have family that were in the camp, then I am not here to tell you what to do. You have total discretion to make that choice for yourself.
Hey there, and welcome to the Digital Nomad Family Podcast. This is the place where families who have or want to have a nomadic lifestyle come together to talk about the highs and lows that this life brings. We celebrate the joys and support each other in the hard. So, if you are a digital nomad family, or will be in the future, this is the place for you. We're glad you're here.
Hey guys, Marissa here, and I want to say thank you so much for listening again to another episode of Digital Nomad Family Podcast. And I am so proud of the series that we just wrapped up. So if you didn't have the opportunity yet to listen to the Roaming Resident series, I'm going to encourage you to make sure you go back and listen to them, because I honestly believe if I would have known everything we talked about in that episode when I started being a digital nomad, it would have been game changing right out of the gate. So I really enjoyed it. And as you guys know, I love to do series. So that was a nice little series to have done. And I was really glad to do it. And I just really think the information in it is very useful. And so if you haven't had a chance to listen to it, and if you haven't had a chance to get your settling in guide, definitely make sure you go back and listen to those episodes. They are really going to help you as you're living this nomadic life, get settled into each and every single house quickly, as cheap as possible. It's going to lower your stress. It's going to be amazing. So make sure you listen to that. This episode is a standalone episode, and we are going to talk today about visiting Auschwitz-Birkenau as a family. And so this is something I've been wanting to talk about ever since my husband and I had the privilege of taking our 4 kids to Auschwitz-Birkenau. It's been a little while now since we've gone, but I've just been thinking about it and, okay, how can I approach this subject with the right information, but also with the right heart? Because this is such a hard place to visit, but an important place to visit. And so everything that I say with so much love and respect for the families that had relatives that went to Auschwitz, that know people, that like have friends. It's all of this information is said with the utmost respect for this place, not respect as in like I'm glad. Doesn't make sense, but I respect it and what happened there. So I hope you guys know my heart coming from this. The reason I want to do this is because I do think it's a very important place that we take our families, but I think there's a lot that needs to be talked about with it, and it's just very heavy. And so I've been thinking, okay, how can I best approach this subject? And I think I've come up with a good balance of tips, I guess, if you want to put them that way. But then also just very practical things. And if I sound harsh in this video, it's not coming from a place of harshness. It's just coming from a place of, I do believe that this is hallowed ground that we need to give as much respect to as we can. So if I say something and you feel like I might be attacking your family, I promise you I'm not. This is just me really wanting to care for this location. So as we talk about it and as I kind of share our experience, again, if you feel like maybe I'm being a little too harsh on the families, I do think this is a location, and if you know me, you're going to hear me say kids have as much right to go places as anybody else. Okay. I get so annoyed when I see on social media, like in the United States of America, you have to get like passes to go to certain places. And sometimes people get annoyed because a kid will get a pass to go somewhere. And maybe there's only 50 passes for the day. And people will get all upset about this kid getting a pass. Well, they're not going to remember it. They're only 7. Why should they get it? Because they're a human and they have just as much right to go there as you. Whether or not they're going to remember it, that's neither here nor there. Children are people and they have just as much of a right to visit all the places as anybody else. So I do believe that. I also believe that we as parents kids don't have discretion, and we do as adults. And so we have to use our discretion and go, is this an appropriate place to take my kid at this moment? Does it make sense? I'm not saying that they should never go. I'm saying, are we in a season where it makes sense to go? One of my absolute favorite YouTubing families, and I follow them on Instagram, and they're called Bags Packed Family. If you don't know them, check them out. And if you watch they did some trekking in Nepal. And they talked about timing in that series a lot. And I really appreciated that because they said people might look at us and say, why did you bring, they had their youngest, his name is Forrest, and he was 3. And they were like, why, people are asking them, why are you going on this trekking adventure now? Well, and the reality was the timing of it worked because Forrest was young enough to be carried, whereas by 3.5, by 4, he's too big to be carried, but he can't walk it yet, right? And his parents knew when he's 4, when he's 5, when he's 6, he can't do this trek. His little legs can't do it. His body can't physically do this. But when he's 3, he is still young enough to be carried in like a backpack. And so as the parents, they made that discretion call. And that's what we need to do. We need to look at our kids and we need to say, okay, you have as much right to trek in Nepal as anybody else because you're a human and you have access to the outdoors. But when is the timing right? Okay. So that's when I talk about this kind of stuff, I'm not talking about kids' right to visit Auschwitz-Birkenau. I do think that kids have just as much of a right, and I think it's very important for them to visit. But we as the parents need to make the discretional call of when to take our kids, okay? So that's my first piece of advice as you are thinking about taking your family to Auschwitz. No, you need to know your kids. And if you feel like the timing is not right for you to go, then put the trip off. I'm not saying don't go. I'm saying put it off. Wait a little bit. This is not a location where you want your kids running around. If your kids are going to see a big field and instantly think, oh, this is a place to play tag, to play hide and go seek, to just run around, this is not the space for that because there could be people there mourning what happened, maybe to someone even in their immediate family. And we want to be very aware of that. So know your kids. If they're not able, and it's not your kids, I'm going to give so many caveats, guys, because my goal is to not offend anybody. But kids are kids, right? It's the nature of a 3-year-old, of a 4-year-old to run around and play. And I love that so incredibly much. Find a playground and just smile, right? I love it. But this is not the place. So if some kids, if they see a big field, maybe they want to go run around and play, but as soon as you tell them, no, They're going to instantly be like, okay, not a big deal. But some kids are going to really struggle with that. And if you have the kind of kid that's really just going to want to run and play when they see a big field, this is not going to be the best time to take them there. Let them grow up a little bit. Let them get to the point where they can see a big field and then, they want to go run and play, but you tell them, no, this isn't the place. And they go, oh, okay. So know your kids. Also, you need to know if your kids can emotionally handle it. And this is a very hard call to make. And one of the ways that I think is best to know if your kid can handle visiting Auschwitz is think about watching a documentary or reading a book about what happened there. If you feel like my kid can't handle that, then now is probably not the time to take them there, because if they can't handle it in theory, I promise it is so much heavier when you're walking on the floors and you're in the different blocks and you're standing in the gas chamber. It is very heavy. So if you feel like your kid wouldn't be able to manage reading a book about it, watching a documentary about it, and I'm not talking like, you don't have to go graphic, right? An age-appropriate book or documentary. If you feel like they couldn't handle that, then I would wait. That's another thing. Kids can they can just be so sensitive, right? And we don't want to exploit that. Not that, we're not bad parents. We're not like exploiting our kids or anything, but we don't want to dismiss that as well. And if it's really going to just be too heavy for them at the time, well, let them mature a little bit so they can know, like, okay, yes, this did happen. This was horrible, but we can move forward. We can learn lessons from it, right? And what are the lessons we can learn and that kind of stuff. So just know your kids. Know, and every single family is going to be different. And I will say, and we'll get to this here in a little bit, just because you think you know how they're going to respond to it, it is such an impactful place that it could have effects in your kids that you don't know is going to happen. And then afterwards you're like, wow, I'm seeing this, and this is a direct connection. Like, they're having this emotional response because of it. And that's okay. But you need to be able to know how to help them. And so just really think about your kids, and is now the right time? I do think that if you have the opportunity, I do believe that this is a location every single person should go to. I think it is so unbelievably important, and we need to never forget what happened. That I do think that everyone that has the chance, and as travelers, we are so privileged to be able to go to the places we go to. And so I do think that we should all make an attempt to go to Auschwitz-Birkenau. But that doesn't mean you have to go this year. It doesn't mean you have to go next year. It means you need to go when it's right for your family to visit. So that's kind of my first one. My second piece of advice is go with a guide. I'm actually going to link, and guys, I don't get anything for this, so please don't think that I'm trying to make money off of this. I'm just going to link the guide. We found a guide on an Airbnb experience, and it was very powerful. One, it helped with all the logistics. So we stayed in Krakow, which is where you stay if you're going to visit Auschwitz. And so we were in Krakow, and we had booked this Airbnb experience, and she was amazing. She has been doing this for so many years that she has just so many stories. She has met people who came back to visit Auschwitz, and they had been prisoners there, and so she can tell you stories like that. She has a wealth of information, and it was very helpful to have someone that we could ask questions to. She explained everything so well. The kids understood it, and I was so glad that we had her. One, just for the knowledge that she brought, but also to handle the logistics. So when you are doing something like this, there is a lot to take into consideration. And she picked us up and she in the middle of Krakow and drove us to both camps and then drove us home. And it made the day a lot easier because we didn't have to worry about driving. We didn't have to worry about anything. Included in the price for the experience was the tickets. And so she just took care of all the logistics of everything. And for 6 people, that just made it a lot easier. So Eric and I, we just focused on the kids. We just focused on, hey, how's everyone doing? How's everyone doing? And we just did so many check-ins that day that not having to worry about where to park, where to go, the directions, it made it just a lot easier to be able to be emotionally available to the kids because we had no stress level with anything else. I hope that makes sense because I can only handle so much stress. So let's say we were driving to the camp and Eric was driving and I'm navigating. Well, that could be a little bit stressful. And if that doesn't go well, maybe we miss a turn or something happens and then by the time we get there, I am already depleted a little bit in what I'm able to manage stress-wise. And my emotional tank is already getting emptied just because of driving. Whereas having someone else do all the driving and all the logistics and buying the tickets, I could be totally filled up to be available for my kids. And I loved that, being able to just focus on them and how they were. So I'm going to link the Airbnb experience. Like I said, I don't get anything from that and you don't have to use it. I just want, if you're interested in visiting the camps, we had a really positive experience with this guide. My next piece of information is definitely do your research. And by that, I mean, read some books, look at some pictures, talk to your kids about it. Know there are very well-known places, even within the camps, that you can do some information about. So that way when you're there, it's not all new. You feel like, okay, I know what happened here. I know why this matters. I know what this is famous for. And the different blocks, those are the buildings that you can go into. The different blocks have different ways that they honor what happened. And I will say, for us, some were definitely very impactful. And I think, and they're all impactful, but the way that you connect to the world, certain ones are going to be more impactful. And that's person to person to person. So for us, I'll just speak for me. There were 2 blocks, 2 memorials that really hit me hard. And my kids, they saw it and I was very moved. And the first one was they had many, many, many kids' shoes. And I did not handle that as strong as maybe someone else would have. And that's okay. We're all different because I have a thing for baby feet. I just absolutely love. I kiss their little toes and I just absolutely love little baby feet. And my kids know I'm always looking at the baby shoes anytime we're in. Like, I don't even have, my youngest is 11 and my kids know I still have a thing for baby shoes. And so when I walked in and I saw this pile of kids' shoes, it just, for me, that was very hard emotionally. And then Eric and I both had a very hard time. They had prayer shawls. And they were prayer shawls that had been smuggled in. And just this idea that these men, they knew what was going to happen. Like they had heard what was happening at Auschwitz. And so many people knew once they got there that this was not going to go well at all, and the odds of them surviving were very, very low, because I think that we have this idea that no one knew what was going on at that camp, but as you do the research, you realize that word was spreading through the various channels, even to the people that were in the camps. And people knew, like, if you go to Auschwitz, you're not coming out. And I think if you think about living back then and experiencing that, I think that is something that makes it even more terrifying, right? Like, if I get on a train to this place, I'm not going to see my family again. I'm not going to see it. Like that, to me, it makes it more scary. And so these men had smuggled in prayer shawls. And the idea that they were still so loyal to their faith that they were going to smuggle in a prayer shawl, that just broke me. And Eric and I were standing there just very moved by their commitment to their faith. That's a very powerful thing to me, because my faith is very important to me. And I was looking at these prayer shawls of men who their faith was everything to them as well. And that was very moving. So know these different areas. You can do some research and just kind of talk to your kids, prepare your kids for some of the sites they're going to see. And then as you're doing your research, there are certain places where photography is not encouraged. And so just know that. So like if you do have older kids that have a camera, have a phone, and they're going to be taking pictures, just let them know, for the most part, you can take pictures around. Personally, for us, we didn't take many photos. It was something that we wanted to remember in our minds, but the idea of taking pictures, and I can't think of any time we took a picture with like us in it. Like we don't have a Dingler family photo at Auschwitz. Does that make sense? We did take pictures of certain things, but we didn't like take pictures of ourselves there. And I think talking to your kids about that, like, hey, this is not a place where you take a selfie. I think that's okay. I think it's okay to teach our kids there are certain places where maybe you want to take a couple pictures so that you remember it really strongly in your mind, but this is not a place where we're going to cram in and do we always do a Dingler family selfie in most places we visit. We did not do that here. We just didn't feel like it was the place. Now, I'm not going to say you're a bad person if you do. I just think you need to speak with your kids and say, hey, you need to figure out, like, especially if you have older kids, right? If you have older kids, then you need to have that conversation with them and go, hey, you need to start thinking about what kind of world traveler you want to be. And is this a location where you want to take some selfies or not? And I just think it's a really good opportunity to talk to our kids about their values as a traveler and why we go to certain places. Certain places we go so we can get the selfies. Certain places we go so we can get the gorgeous pictures, right? And then other places we go so we can learn lessons. And if you're there to learn a lesson, you don't so much need to worry about the pictures you're taking or doing selfies or anything like that. So definitely do your research, know the different areas, know the different blocks, understand the attitude of the camp, the presence you want to give when you're at the camp. So yeah, I think that's really important. And especially if your kids are older, I do think it's a really good opportunity for them to start thinking about the kind of visitor they want to be. So yeah. My next piece of advice is very logistical. Think about the timing you want to go. In the summertime, it's a lot more crowded. It just is. It is very crowded. We went in March, and we were the only people there. It was very unique. And our tour guide even said she had never seen it so empty. When we were in one camp, there were about 15 other people. And then we went over to the other camp and we were alone. And so we were walking through the various blocks, looking at all the memorials, and we were the only ones there. And when we went to leave, again, we are the only ones there, and the security guard was just following us, and it was just us, and he was giving us plenty of space. He wasn't being pushy or anything, but they were getting ready to lock up, so he was just making sure that no one else was behind us and everything, and that all of us got out. But yeah, it was just us, and that made it very. The kids did not love it. I think they would have appreciated some more people there, because it felt to them, it felt very scary being there alone, because it was starting to get dark. They knew what had happened in these places. There are certain blocks you are not allowed to go in, the things that happened there were so terrible that out of complete respect for the people that had to suffer through what happened in those blocks, they don't allow visitors into them. And our kids knew that. They knew that we're not allowed to walk in that one because it was so awful in there. And that made it feel very heavy and a little bit scary. And they look back on it now and they're like, I wish there would have been some other people there. At the time, they were okay with it, but now looking back, they say, oh, I wish there would have been some others. And you can't control that, but that kind of leads me into my next piece of advice. Don't just visit and then leave and then not talk about it. Debrief this with your kids. This is going to be something that you don't know how every person is going to be impacted by until you do it. And those kind of things are very scary, especially for moms, I think. Not that dads don't care, but us moms, we really like to know, well, here's how this one's going to respond. Here's how this one's going to go. And this is just something I don't think anyone knows how they're going to respond to it until they do it. And something that I will share that happened to our family, and Martin is okay me saying this, Martin was very impacted by it because Martin and Stoyanka are Roma. And Martin learned that thousands of Roma people were also brought to Auschwitz-Birkenau, and they were also murdered at this camp. And when Martin realized how many Roma people had been murdered, that really impacted him. And he had a very long time of processing it. And him and Eric actually sat up for many hours that night just talking about it so that he could process it. And there was no way we would have known. If you would have asked me before we went, I'd have been like, Martin's the last one that's going to need time to really process this, and that's going to be high on the emotional impact, if that makes sense. It's not that he doesn't care. It's just his personality is not that way to be long-term affected by something. But he was the most emotionally impacted at the time of it. The other three have had their ways of processing it, and every time we talk about it, more and more stuff comes out. But at the time, it hit Martin the hardest that day. And there, I would not have had any idea that was going to happen, that he was the last one. If you'd have asked me, I would have said maybe Riley, but nope, I was totally wrong. And that's the thing, you just don't know. And so I think knowing, okay, hey, we're going to visit Auschwitz-Birkenau this day, and we're just going to, you and your partner can sit down and you can come up with maybe just some questions to ask over the next few days. You don't have to sit down and have a huge debrief, or on the drive home, you don't have to have this super deep conversation. I think it's throughout the following days asking people like, hey, have you thought more about this place? Maybe one of the kids was really moved by one of the memorials, and you can say, hey, have you thought any more about that? Or looking back, why do you think that was so powerful to you? And just ask these open-ended questions and allow them to process it. That's going to be so important to help them take the one-day experience and let it have an impact in the rest of their lives, which is what we want this place to be, right? We want our time at Auschwitz-Birkenau to have a lasting impact on our families, not just we went there. If you are going to Auschwitz-Birkenau just to say you went there, I'm not convinced that you should be going there yet. I think maybe you should check your motives, do some research, and then figure out, okay, why are we going there? And I think that knowing why you're going there instead of just, oh, well, it's a tourist thing to do and we want to be able to say we've gone, I'm not convinced that that is the best motive. So maybe I'm wrong in that. I don't know. If you've been to Auschwitz-Birkenau and you only went just to go, I would love to hear about it. I do know that people have gone just to go because they were in Poland and it's a famous place and they've gone. And I do think that they can have a very long-term impact because of it, if you're open to that. Sadly, I have seen a lot of people go just to go, and then they take some pictures, and it doesn't seem like the lessons have really affected their heart in any way. And for me just personally and my family, we didn't want that to be our Auschwitz experience. We wanted it to be something that honored what happened at this place. So that's about the timing. That's about debriefing it a little bit. And then another just logistic, make sure you take your passports. Check with if you go with a tour guide, check with them, be like, hey, can we have a copy of our passport? Do we have to take the actual passport? But usually they want you to have your passport with you. So there's just a quick little logistic thing. And my last little piece of advice for if you go to visit it is prepare your kids and yourself well. And I know I've been talking about this. I know I've been saying it, and I don't want to just keep saying the same thing over and over again. But I really do believe if someone were to look at you and be like, oh, well, before you go there, you should watch this documentary. And maybe it's not a graphic documentary. Maybe it's a well done documentary about the place. And they're like, it'll really help your kids prepare for it. And you're like, oh, well, I'm concerned that that's going to be too much for them. That's a fine thing to believe about your kids. But if you honestly believe the documentary or the book is going to be too much, I would just maybe wait. Like, even if you're like, well, we don't know when the next time we're going to be in Poland is, I would still wait, because the places that you visit, they are heavy and they should be heavy. We were in one of the bunkhouses and we learned why the beds were created the way they were created. And I'll share this with you guys, a little fact. They were built on an angle. And the reason they did that was because as you starve to death, which is so many of these people died of starvation, especially the men that were forced, that weren't, many of the women and children, I'm not even going to say many, most of, the lion's share of the women and children were instantly sent to the gas chambers. But of the men and young boys that weren't sent right away, one of the biggest causes of death was starvation. And as your body goes into starvation mode, you lose control of your bowels. And the Nazis knew this. And so they built the beds at an angle, because their logic was, well, we know this is going to happen, so we want the feces to just go down and not like fall straight. I'm sorry if this is graphic, but guys, this is the reality of Auschwitz-Birkenau. So we want the feces to run down the bed and then fall onto the side. So they're not just falling straight down. And this is this is the place we're talking about, where every single bit of it was thought out and designed, knowing hundreds of thousands, just the amount of people that were killed here, into the million, right? Into the millions of people. And knowing that even the beds were designed in a way so that as people were dying, maybe it would not be like this is going to happen. So how can we make these beds so that this happens? Well, this is the place we're talking about. This is the place that we're visiting. So all around you is heavy, heavy things. There's not a place in it that you can just go, well, we're only going to visit the places that aren't as hard. No, it's all hard. The entire time for us, we saw our tour guide took us to a train car and talked about the train car and that experience. And then after the train car, we went to the camps. And from the moment we got out and we saw the train car, it was heavy. Just every single bit of it was heavy. And I think that that's okay. I think it's a very heavy place. That was the word that we use in our family, and that when I talk to families that have also visited, the word is heavy. That's just the only word we can come up with. But it should be, and it is. And preparing your kids for that is a hard thing to do, but it's a valuable thing to do. So I would say the two things that I'm really going to encourage you to think about is prepping your kids well, and then how are you going to debrief it with them afterwards? And not just a one-time debrief, but it's been a year and a half now since we have visited. And to this day, Martin is still extraordinarily moved by it. And the other three kids are constantly, each time we bring it up, there's something new. They're like, you know what, I remember this, and I didn't think about that last time, but now I think about it, and I think about this. And each time it's something like that. And so I think it's this constant thing that, okay, well, how are we going to bring this up as we are moving forward? And it doesn't have to be like a monthly conversation you have, just occasionally be like, hey, I was reading this book, and they talked about this during World War II, and that reminded me of when we visited Auschwitz-Birkenau, and that reminded me how sad I was when I walked in and I saw all those baby shoes, right? And so it's just stuff like that. It's allowing your kids to process it as they're growing up, because allowing them to process this at each different stage of their development is how it's going to have that long-lasting impact that we want these experiences to have, right? Like we take our kids places so that it affects who they are. And we don't want our visit to Auschwitz-Birkenau to just be this scary thing that, well, we were the only ones there and it got dark and I didn't like that. Well, now I've made it about me, right? Now I'm looking back and I was scared, but and I actually had this conversation with Ryan the last time he brought it up, because he said, I was so scared because it was dark and we were the only ones there. And I said, man, imagine how scared you would have been. Imagine how scared those kids were. And you make it about the people that were there, not me. It's not about me. It's about those kids. It's about the moms. It's about the dads, right? And it's about remembering them and what they went through. But then it's also about going, okay, what can we do to make sure that this never happens again? What can we do to step in? How can we make sure that a situation like the Holocaust isn't something that's going to happen on our watch? And it's about teaching them those lessons, right? So that is, I'm going to end it there. That's my, this has been very, a lot for me to talk about, just because I think this location is so sacred. And I do believe that there are just places on earth that we need to respect because of what happened. And if you don't agree with me on that, that's okay. We can have different opinions on that. But that's just what I believe. But I also don't want the location to become more important than the lessons, right? We need to find that balance in both. And I hope that this has helped you as you're thinking about maybe visiting this place as a family. I hope that this has maybe given you some ideas, some things to think about, maybe that you hadn't thought about, answer some questions you have. And if you have any other questions, like either logistics wise or just emotional world wise, feel free to email me. My contact information is in the show notes, and I will answer to the best of my ability any question that you guys have. We do not have Judaism in our family, and so the deepest connection we have directly with Auschwitz was Martin and Stoyanka being Roma, and knowing that thousands of Roma people were placed in this camp and murdered as well. And that was really hard, for us to take. The one thing I will say, now that we've kind of talked about all of this, the one thing I will say is everything in this episode is for people who don't have a direct connection to Auschwitz. If your family was in the camp, you get to decide for a totally yourself. Take your kids when they're babies, take them every single year if that's what you want to do, because you have that direct connection with it and I don't. So if you have family that were in the camp, then I am not here to tell you what to do. You have total discretion to make that choice for yourself. And so I hope that makes sense. So with that, I'm going to stop talking. And I hope that this has been a little bit helpful to you guys. If you have visited Auschwitz-Birkenau and want to talk about your experience, I'm here. You can shoot me an email. You can message me on Instagram. I know that sometimes it's just nice to talk to someone else that has been to a place that maybe had a deep impact on your life. So yeah. And with that, I want to say thank you so much for listening, and I hope that you are traveling joyfully.